They invited me out of obligation, not love. I could tell by the way the message read, "Don't be late this time." I stood outside the restaurant staring at the message one last time before slipping my phone into my clutch. The warm Georgia air didn't reach me. Not really. Not with the coldness waiting behind those ornate doors. I had no illusions about why I was summoned tonight. It wasn't to be included. It was to be presentable, polite, and silent. The last time I was late to a family gathering, Izzy had announced to a room full of cousins and neighbors that Elena always likes to make an entrance when she bothers to show up. Everyone had laughed. I had smiled. Tonight, I wasn't giving her the opportunity. A hostess led Darius and me to the private dining room. The soft murmur of voices fell quiet as we entered. They were already seated. Of course. Elena Helen said, her tone polite but detached. "You made it." I nodded. "Good evening." Walter didn't rise. "Let's not waste time. The appetizers are already ordered." Izzy beamed across the table, stunning in a cream silk blouse and pearls that had once belonged to our grandmother. She had a way of wearing heirlooms, like they were earned, like they'd always been hers. Darius and I took our seats. No one asked how we were doing. No one offered a drink. Conversation resumed as though we hadn't arrived. "So Izzy," Walter said, turning fully to her, "tell us more about this promotion." "Director of Brand Partnerships," she said smoothly. "I just signed a multi-region rollout for our East Coast expansion. 36 markets. I'll be overseeing it all." "That's impressive," Darius offered kindly. Izzy didn't look at him. "It's what I'm good at." Then eyes on me. Of course, not everyone can handle pressure. I bit my tongue. I wasn't here to spar. "Not yet," Walter smirked. "You always had that head for business. I remember when you were 12, running lemonade stands like a pro. Unlike some people," he added, glancing at me, "who chased abstract ideas and ended up, where again?" "Still running my own company," I replied evenly. "Is that what we're calling it?" Helen chimed in with a tight laugh. "You look tired, dear. Marriage not suiting you." The implication hung there like smoke. Darius reached for my hand under the table. I squeezed his fingers, but didn't look at him. I couldn't. My chest was tight, my jaw locked. I stared down at my plate untouched before serving him a small helping of grilled vegetables. A tiny gesture, an old habit. Izzy noticed. "Still serving a nobody," she said, tilting her head with mock sweetness. "That's loyal of you." I looked up slowly. "That's love." Helen shifted in her chair, and I caught her exchanging a glance with Walter, who seemed suddenly interested in his wine glass. It was always this way. Me, the awkward one, the unnecessary one, the one who never quite fit the Whitmore mold. Walter cleared his throat and stood. The candlelight caught the silver of his cufflinks, the glint in his eye sharp as ever. "I'd like to propose a toast," he said. "To family, and to our real pride, Isabel." Glasses clinked. My own stayed rooted to the table. No one noticed. Or maybe they did, and simply didn't care. I forced a smile, cold and practiced. Inside, my heart was burning. They won't get another toast from me. If I didn't speak, they wouldn't notice. If I did, they'd wish I hadn't. The gravel cracked under my shoes as I stepped out of the car, the house looming ahead like a monument to everything I used to crave. Belonging, recognition, love that didn't come with conditions. The white pillars, the ivy around the porch columns, the familiar scent of old pine sap in the Georgia heat. It all welcomed me with a chill I couldn't shake. Helen opened the door with her usual frozen poise. "You didn't have to ring," she said, moving aside. "I wasn't sure you'd want me to." I answered. She said nothing. Inside, the air was heavy with furniture polish and judgment. As I entered the front hall, my eyes instinctively scanned the wall of framed memories. There they were, rows and rows of pictures. Izzy on the debate team. Izzy getting her MBA. Izzy's wedding, her baby shower, her magazine feature on young women in finance. And me, just one. A blurry photo from high school graduation, half covered by a potted plant. No sign of my tech company launch. No engagement, no wedding day, nothing of Darius and me. I stepped closer. Where's our wedding photo? Helen fluffed a throw pillow on the love seat. We thought you didn't want to be reminded. That's not true, I said, my voice tightening. Darius walked in behind me, quiet but watchful. He held the bottle of red wine we'd brought as a gift, though he knew it wouldn't be opened. He gave me a small nod that said, I'm here. I see it too. Walter sat in the armchair, glasses low on his nose, the Wall Street Journal spread wide in front of him. Darius, he said without standing. What is it you do again? I'm the founder of a cybersecurity firm. Darius replied calmly. We help institutions secure. Walter waved a hand, cutting him off. So, no real title then. He runs the entire company, I snapped. He has patents pending. He's in negotiations with university systems. Walter raised an eyebrow. Well, you could have married a lawyer. At least they know how to argue. Darius didn't flinch. He'd been here before in boardrooms and tech expos where men underestimated him. But this was different. This was supposed to be family. Helen leaned forward, sipping her tea. At least you're married. That's something, I suppose. I wasn't sure if it was pity or a backhanded compliment. With her, the line was always blurred. Footsteps echoed from upstairs. Izzy descended like a vision, dressed in flawless white workout gear, every movement curated for maximum attention. Well, she said, eyebrows raised. The prodigal sister returns. She barely looked at Darius. Instead, she drifted toward the foyer table, sifting through the day's mail like she owned the place. What brings you two around? She asked, voice light sharp underneath. We're visiting, I replied, holding my smile in place. For his sake, she asked with mock curiosity, eyes sliding to Darius. Or maybe you just missed the thrill of being ignored. Izzy, I warned. She smirked. Maybe she married you out of pity. Darius remained still, expression unreadable. But I knew that silence. It wasn't indifference. It was restraint. We moved into the sitting room. I tried to ignore the absence of our photo from the mantel, the sense that any trace of my life had been wiped away. Helen sat near the window, idly checking her phone. I always assumed you'd be first down the aisle, she said without looking up. But Izzy surprised us all. Maybe she just found someone more suitable, I said, letting the words hang. Helen looked up. I didn't say that. No, I said quietly. You didn't have to. The grandfather clock ticked in the corner louder than I remembered. I stood needing space and walked through the hallway. My fingers brushed the edge of a side cabinet I used to hide notes in as a child. I opened the drawer. There it was. Our wedding photo frame still intact, stuffed beneath warranty slips and expired coupons. I took it out and stared. Darius and I were beaming. Sunlight had hit my dress just right. We looked like the beginning of a story they never wanted to read. I turned slowly, taking in the house that once knew my laughter, my tears, my triumphs. Now it felt staged, preserved for a version of family I no longer recognized. I looked around the house I grew up in and felt like a visitor in a stranger's home. I never agreed to speak, but they called my name anyway, just to watch me flinch. The memory from high school hit me like a slap. I had earned the top GPA, was supposed to give the valedictorian speech. But Mom decided Izzy would be more photogenic on stage. You'll have other moments, she told me, while pinning a corsage on Izzy's dress. I sat in the audience applauding words I had written, watching my sister deliver them like a show pony. Tonight was no different. The lights were soft gold glinting off crystal and satin in the downtown banquet hall. We were there to celebrate Izzy's promotion, director of operations at some startup that Dad helped fund. She strutted up to the podium in a fitted navy jumpsuit, hair glossy, eyes already misty with performance. She was flawless, rehearsed, adored. My family has always supported me, she said into the microphone, especially my father and mother. Their faith in me has never wavered. Her gaze swept the room everywhere except where I sat. She paused, soaking in the applause, and then Walter, already holding his second glass of scotch, stood. Elena, he called out, why don't you say a few words? Every pair of eyes turned. I blinked, caught mid-sip of water. There had been no warning, no request, just expectation. Darius glanced over at me. "You don't have to," he murmured under his breath. His fingers grazed mine, grounding me, but I was already rising legs, moving before my mind caught up. The room quieted. I could hear my heels clicking on the floor like a metronome counting down to humiliation. I approached the microphone the same way one approaches a cliff edge. "Congratulations, Izzy," I said, voice clear but small. Helen's laughter broke through like the crack of a whip. What a sweet surprise. From the quiet one. Laughter followed. Not roaring just enough to sting. Polite, dismissive, cruel. I tried to smile, retreating from the mic, but Izzy wasn't done. She rose from her seat like a performer heading for a final bow. "She's always been humble," she said sweetly. "Almost invisible." The audience laughed again. My stomach twisted. I felt like I was dissolving under their gaze, vanishing as they nodded in agreement. Invisible. I glanced toward my mother, already checking her phone. My father was back to sipping his drink, proud of his youngest. Izzy beamed her smirk, practiced and smug. I thought of the graduation speech I never gave. The awards I had once earned, now buried under Izzy's framed certificates in our childhood hallway. Of Mom replacing my photo on the living room shelf with one of Izzy on a boat in Santorini. I wasn't just excluded, I was erased. But Darius was watching me. He stood, calm, steady. He reached for my hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "Let's go," he whispered. That one moment his hand in mine felt louder than anything said into that microphone. I didn't ask him to repeat himself. I didn't check if anyone was watching. I just stepped away. And as I turned walking past the tables through the silence that followed, something shifted in my spine. No guilt, no shame, just clarity. I stood up, turned my back, and for the first time, I didn't wait for anyone's permission. In this family, love is a currency, and I stopped paying years ago. The study in my parents' house always had that distinct scent of old leather lemon polish and quiet judgments. It was dim, with tall arched windows that let in just enough late afternoon sun to cast long, slanted shadows across the floor. The walls were lined with shelves of untouched books and expensive ornaments no one ever spoke of. But it was the portrait above the fireplace that always caught my eye. My great-grandfather, Frederick Whitmore. His painted eyes were harsh, as though he could see right through me and disapproved of everything I'd ever done. Helen sat perfectly poised on the armchair opposite me, sipping tea with the kind of grace that came with years of performance. Her posture was flawless, her tone sharpened to a razor. "Let's not waste time," she said. "Do you even love him? Or is this rebellion disguised as marriage?" I almost laughed, but I didn't. "Is that what you think this is?" I asked, my voice calm, but inside I was trembling. "A rebellion, I think," she said, setting her cup down with a delicate clink, "that you've always had a tendency to run toward the wrong things just to spite us. This is no different. I chose him, Helen. Not to rebel, not to hurt you. I chose him because I saw something real." The door creaked open, and Walter walked in his steps, deliberate, echoing like a verdict on the hardwood floor. "Real," he scoffed. "Real isn't what builds legacies. What's real is what lasts. A name. A reputation. Security." I turned to him, forcing my hands to stay still. "You mean wealth, status, appearances. That's what you were born into," he said. "We gave you every opportunity. And this is what you do with it. You marry a man whose name carries no weight. His name carries weight where it matters." I snapped, surprising even myself. "In rooms where integrity still counts. In spaces you wouldn't recognize." Helen leaned back slightly. "Oh, please. A self-started tech company. No formal pedigree. You truly believe that's going to last. You could have had anyone. Doctors, lawyers, Ivy Leaguers. And I chose someone who sees me." I replied, "Not someone who sees a Whitmore." The silence between us crackled like dry ice. Walter stepped closer, his face taut. "You're turning your back on what built you." "I'm turning my back on arrogance," I said. "And the idea that love has to come with credentials." Helen's voice dropped to a near whisper, yet it chilled the air more than a shout. You will regret this marriage. We guarantee it. For a moment I looked at them both, their stiff shoulders, their clipped words, their unwavering belief that they knew best. But what they didn't know, what they refused to see, was that the world they were so desperate to preserve was already crumbling, and I wanted no part of its ruins. You've made your choice, Walter said. Don't expect support. Not now. Not ever. I stood my spine tall in defiance, though my chest was tight with the weight of everything unspoken. The chair scraped behind me like a gavel hitting wood. I glanced at the painting above the fireplace one last time. If support means sacrificing the best decision I ever made, then I don't want it. Their silence was louder than any scream. I walked through the corridor, past generations of framed awards, Izzy's degrees, Izzy's charity events, Izzy's promotion, and realized not a single one bore my name. But I remembered my grandfather's words whispered to me on the porch one night, when I was 13 and heartbroken. Your worth isn't in their praise, Elena, it's in your conviction. And that conviction, at last, had returned. I stepped outside the study sunlight spilling across the marble floors and breathed in like I hadn't in years. They don't know anything about the man I married, but they will. They whispered about my husband in that room. What they didn't know, he built half the systems running the place. Our apartment was modest by Whitmore standards. No grand chandeliers, no glossy wood floors flown in from Italy, but it was ours. The scent of roasted coffee lingered from earlier, and the soft hum of Darius typing filled the room like a familiar melody. I sat at our kitchen counter, feet tucked under me, watching him work. His brow furrowed in concentration the same way it had when we first met, back when his office was a shared space above a laundromat. Hey, he said, suddenly looking up, check this out. He turned the screen toward me. A headline from TechVine Miralogic secures 5 million in Series A, pioneering modular intelligence for media infrastructure. My heart stuttered. That was our company. That was his company. I thought we were still under NDA, I murmured. They only mentioned the funding, he replied. No client names. I read further. One paragraph stood out. Miralogic's adaptable back-end frameworks are quietly powering several major media networks. My eyes stopped at one particular name, buried in the subtext, Whitmore Media. For a moment, I was speechless. All those dinners, all those digs about him not having a real job, all the mocking nods from Walter and Helen. They had no idea they were running their empire on the very backbone my husband had built. Darius leaned back, arms folded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Funny, isn't it? I shook my head. The absurdity almost laughable. They called you invisible. And yet, he said softly, they don't function without us. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It brimmed with quiet satisfaction. But also with something else rising inside me. A slow, intentional fire. I wasn't just tired. I was done. Done fading into their background. Done apologizing for not being Izzy, for not marrying someone they handpicked. I stood and walked over to the bookshelf. Between the old architecture books and some of my sketch pads was a leather-bound folder. I hadn't touched it in years. Inside was a name card slightly worn at the edges. Nathaniel Reed, Corporate Law and Strategy. I remembered that night after the university pitch event when Darius offered him a ride home during a storm. Nathaniel had said, if either of you ever need a door opened, call me. I don't forget those who help in the rain. You still think he meant that I asked Darius, turning the card between my fingers. If he's half the man you said he was, he does. Just then, there was a knock at the door. It was Joanna, our neighbor, the kind who brought fresh peaches from her sister's farm and asked how I was doing, like she meant it. Elena, she said, her eyes crinkling into a warm smile. I was just thinking of your grandfather this morning. Did you know when the mayor offered him a city contract, he turned it down? Said, I'd rather build something quietly and well than loudly and badly. He used to say the same about you. She's not loud, he told me once, But she's the one who builds. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. That quiet fire inside me, he'd seen it too. After Joanna left, I stood by the window phone in handcard on the counter. The sun dipped behind the Savannah rooftops, casting long shadows across our little apartment. I dialed the number. There was a pause, a few clicks, then a voice I hadn't heard in nearly a decade. Nathaniel Reed. I took a breath. It's Elena Whitmore. I think it's time I stopped being invisible. A beat. Then he replied, steady and certain. I've been waiting for this call. They built a system to keep people like Darius out. He built one they couldn't live without. Nathaniel's office wasn't the kind of place people stumbled into. Perched on the 20th floor of a sleek Atlanta tower, it overlooked the city like it owned the secrets of every company below. Inside, the lighting was soft, the furniture minimalist and unassuming, but the tension, the precision, the silence between keystrokes, that was power. Layla, Nathaniel's right hand, led us into the private conference room. She was sharp-eyed and brisk, her words clipped but efficient. She handed me a folder without a word. Inside were pages of code snippets, licensing agreements, and audit logs. Darius glanced over them with a quiet nod, then looked to Nathaniel, who leaned forward with his elbows on the polished table. It's confirmed, Nathaniel said. Your code forms the core framework of Whitmore Media's content distribution and analytics systems. They didn't just license it, they copied modules and embedded them across departments. Unlicensed. That's breach. My pulse quickened. They thought he was invisible, Nathaniel smiled. That's their first mistake. Their second was assuming no one would ever trace it. Darius stayed silent, scanning the documents. Then he spoke, voice calm. So what's our play? Layla tapped her tablet and turned the screen toward us. I ran a compliance review based on their last 6 quarters. If this goes public, it's not just copyright infringement, it's corporate fraud. And if they try to scrub anything, now we've already archived server logs and metadata chains. I leaned back, letting the weight of it all settle. I'd sat through years of their disapproval. The glares, the snide remarks, the deliberate erasure of my accomplishments. All while the empire they worshipped was quietly standing on the shoulders of the man they belittled. I flipped through the final page of the report. We don't go public yet. We watch them dig their own hole. Let them feel safe. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. That gives us time to build your leverage. I can start reaching out to contacts inside Whitmore Media. There are cracks in every fortress, especially when the family thinks they're untouchable. Who would talk, I asked. Layla answered first. People who've been overlooked just like you. Legal assistants, mid-level tech staff, HR. A name like Whitmore casts a long shadow, but there's always someone standing in it ready to step out. Darius smirked, eyes still on the screen. Let them think I'm a nobody? That's what makes this work. I could feel it now, that strange shift in the air when you stop surviving and start planning. I wasn't the silent sister anymore. I wasn't the background guest at my own life. I was moving slowly but deliberately, gathering facts like weapons. After the meeting, we stayed behind. Nathaniel and Layla had other calls to make. I took out my laptop and opened the encrypted archive I hadn't touched in years. My old employment files from when I briefly consulted for Whitmore Media. And there it was. A licensing addendum signed under my maiden name, tucked into an HR upload dated back before Izzy's promotion. The clause clearly stated all proposed integrations involving licensed tech must be reviewed by original IP consultants prior to structural implementation. I remembered that project. I'd submitted the paperwork, flagged it, and never heard back. They moved forward without me. But now that forgotten contract was a time bomb. One they'd left ticking in their own system. I looked over at Darius, then back at the screen. They'd forgotten who I was, but I hadn't. I opened the folder, highlighted the clause, and whispered to myself as I hit save. I opened the old contract and saw the clause they forgot I still held. When you sign papers without reading, you give the quiet ones a weapon. The storm hit just after 9. Rain streaked down the apartment windows like ink on glass, blurring the city lights into watercolor smudges. Our dining table had vanished beneath piles of old folders, printed contracts, flash drives and legal pads filled with red pen annotations. I hadn't moved in hours. My back ached, but I didn't stop. Not tonight. The document lay open in front of me, the original user license agreement between Miralogic and Whitmore Media, signed 5 years ago. It looked like a standard contract, the kind executives skim and sign without thought. But nestled deep in the third annex, beneath 2 dense paragraphs of legal language, was the clause they had missed. Use of Miralogic proprietary systems constitutes agreement to data access auditing by the original licensor. I had written that clause myself back when Darius was still building beta modules in his laptop on our living room floor. We didn't have lawyers then. Just intuition, caution, and the quiet paranoia of people who'd never been handed anything and expected even less. Now that clause was our golden thread. Darius entered with 2 mugs of tea, setting one beside me. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, eyes heavy with fatigue, but when he glanced at the page I had highlighted, he paused. "They never asked what that clause meant, did they?" he said. I shook my head. They assumed it was fluff, that no one like us would enforce it. Layla's voice crackled through the speakerphone. And now they've tripped over it. Their third-party integration with ShareNow systems violates the licensing scope. They've been exporting proprietary back-end modules to external vendors, all without amendment. I felt something like adrenaline, but quieter, colder. A sharpening of the senses. "They opened the gates," I murmured, and didn't think the lock mattered. I started logging violations. Every export flag, every metadata trail Layla sent me. I documented each breach with timestamp system logs and cross-referenced them against the original contract. They had scaled the system far beyond what we agreed, sloppy, arrogant, assuming they were too big to be questioned. They weaponized my silence. I said nearly to myself, now I'll weaponize their arrogance. I paused on a memory signing that original agreement. Helen had been at the head of the boardroom table. Walter never even looked at me. Izzy was fresh off her PR degree, nodding like she understood technical terms she couldn't pronounce. Back then, I had spoken softly, rarely at all. I remember their smirks. The assumption that I was tagging along some sentimental attachment Darius couldn't shake. Now they were living inside a system built on our terms, and those terms were about to choke them. Layla sent over the latest compiled archive. "This isn't just breach," she said. "It's ongoing deliberate misuse. When this goes public, they'll need more than spin." I replied, "It won't go public yet. We're not here for noise. We're here for leverage." I sent the file to Nathaniel. 10 minutes later, my phone lit up with a single message. "Nathaniel, we have enough. Your move. Sometimes you don't need to fight back. You just need to hold up a mirror." Nathaniel's conference room felt less like a law office and more like a command center. No windows, no distractions, just strategy. A long glass table, dim ambient lighting, and screens silently scrolling through data streams. Layla moved quickly between laptops, occasionally scribbling something into a notepad. Martin leaned back, eyes half-lidded, but I knew he was listening to every word. I stood at the front of the room, heart calm, voice steady. "We're about to leak information. Fabricated, but plausible. A partnership announcement between our holding company and Blackridge Systems." Martin raised an eyebrow. "You're baiting Helen and Izzy with their favorite enemy." "Exactly," I said. "They see Blackridge as a threat to their dominance in streaming tech. Even a whisper of our alignment with them will make the Whitmores panic." Layla added, "I've embedded trackable metadata. The file will trace back to a shared directory that Izzy still monitors." Nathaniel nodded slowly, arms crossed. "And if it leaks, we'll know it came from the inside. That gives us more than just suspicion, it gives us a signature." We uploaded the forged document and internal pitch deck, outlining fictional features, mock press headlines, even a fake quote from Blackridge's CEO. Everything meticulously crafted to provoke. It was designed not to inform, but to incite. Then we waited. 20 hours later, Martin walked in with his phone unlocked. "Bingo," he said, sliding it toward me. It was an email thread from Izzy sent through her Whitmore Media account. The subject line read, Immediate action required. Undermine Elena Grant. I skimmed quickly, breath-catching with each line. Legal to initiate review of all software licensing contracts. Prepare press countermeasures. We will not let her damage our name with third-tier alliances. Below a note from Helen. Be swift. Shut her down before this spreads. Layla was already pulling up related logs. No one even fact-checked it. They jumped straight into suppression. I sat back in my chair. They walked right into it. Nathaniel's eyes gleamed. This proves coordination. They moved against you based on unverified non-public data. That's retaliatory and opens up multiple legal angles, especially if we show they've done this before. I nodded. They've always relied on arrogance. This time, it's traceable. Darius, quiet until now, leaned forward. Do we release the baited document publicly? Not yet, I said. We let them stew. Every step they take now digs the hole deeper. Martin chuckled. You turned their fear into a tripwire. Layla refreshed the screen again. Their compliance officer just scheduled an emergency review. They know something's off. But they're guessing and wrong. I stood and crossed to the window. The sun was fading behind the skyline, casting long shadows across the room. Funny how clarity could come not through confrontation, but orchestration. They've been controlling the narrative for so long, I murmured. They forgot what it feels like to be observed. Martin tapped the glass tabletop. Should we proceed with phase 2? Leaking the follow-up document? Yes? I said, but not through us. Let's have it appear in a minor tech form, quiet enough to seem accidental, loud enough to echo. We moved as one. Layla scheduled the upload for 3 a.m. Martin looped in a freelance journalist we trusted to notice. Nathaniel drafted a timeline of Whitmore's internal actions for legal use. I updated my own notes, every step, every misstep they'd made, every confirmation of their bias. They think this is just another threat to silence, I whispered more to myself than to anyone. But it's a mirror. The silence in the room was dense, not empty, but heavy with intention. We were no longer reacting. We were predicting. Just then, Nathaniel's phone buzzed. He picked it up, read the screen, then looked straight at me. Izzy just walked into a legal ambush of her own making. No one claws back power quietly. And Izzy doesn't claw, she bites. It started with a headline. Exclusive startup. Behind key media infrastructure faces, patent dispute. Beneath it a photo of Darius looking confident, cropped just close enough to appear arrogant. And the quote delivered like a blade behind the smile. I worry about my sister Izzy, told the journalist. She's always trusted the wrong people. I only hope this doesn't destroy everything she's worked for. My hand trembled slightly as I held the printed copy in the office kitchen. It wasn't just shade, it was strategic character assassination. And it was working. They didn't even ask for a statement from us, I muttered. Nathaniel looked up from his phone. That's not journalism. That's placement. Kara was handed this. He tossed his phone onto the table screen facing up. Messages flooded in investors, hesitating reporters, requesting comment low-level employees, asking if layoffs were imminent. Perception moved faster than facts. My phone rang. I didn't want to answer, but the name Helen blinked across the screen. I answered in silence. We tried to warn you, she said smoothly, not bothering with pleasantries. Now you'll see what happens when people trust amateurs. I said nothing. She didn't deserve my voice. Izzy's only doing what's necessary to protect the family name, she continued. You've aligned yourself with someone. Untested. That has consequences. She hung up before I could respond. Darius walked in his face, tight jaw, clenched. He held his own copy of the article, crumpled and damp from the rain. I should step down, he said flatly. At least until this cools off. No, I said immediately. Too loud, too sharp. I softened. You didn't do anything wrong. They're not attacking me with facts, Elena. They're using reputation. And I don't come from what they expect. I knew this would happen. You didn't know they'd go this far. He turned away, voice low. You did. I walked to him and placed my hand over his. This isn't about your name, I said slowly. It's about mine, and I won't let them bury it again. His shoulders eased slightly, and I saw something shift behind his eyes. Trust, maybe, or resolve. We sat together at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers, court filings, printouts. Nathaniel joined us, arms crossed. "This is slander," he said, "and we can hit back. But we need more than the truth. We need a story." He tapped the article. "This journalist, Kara, if she was used, she might be open to hearing your side." I looked at the byline. Kara Fleming. Young, smart, ambitious. Likely pushed into a corner by editors and promises. But maybe, just maybe there was an opening. "She'll be wary," Darius warned. "Good," I said. "She should be." I opened my laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard. I didn't write defensively. I wrote with clarity, precision, and fire. I highlighted timelines, attached supporting documents, included quotes and links. I embedded charts non-proprietary, but damning. A dossier of contradiction to everything that had just hit the newsstands. I stopped before hitting send. Then I added one line. "You've written one side. Want to see the other." And I pressed send. Some things they hid to protect themselves. But this file, it exposes everything. The air in the archive room was heavy with the scent of old paper and something older, like secrets left too long in the dark. Dust clung to everything, even the metal handles of the drawers lining the walls. I pulled on gloves Layla handed me and followed her into the maze of boxes and filing cabinets, each labeled with codes only Nathaniel seemed to understand. "This is where the bodies are buried," Nathaniel joked as he flipped a switch. The overhead lights buzzed before flickering to life, casting a yellow haze over stacks of forgotten documents. "I've kept everything: contracts, drafts, backroom deals." Most people thought these were shredded years ago. Layla was already scanning barcodes on the shelves, her tablet lighting up with each beep. "We're looking for a file tagged Whitmore Trust Reallocation. Should be between 2002 and 2005. I walked slowly, letting my fingers trace the faded ink on the boxes. Part of me was hoping we wouldn't find it, that what I feared wasn't true. But deeper down, I knew we would. I had lived my whole life in the shadows of what was hidden. Today, I was done being afraid of the dark. My hand stopped on a worn folder, tucked behind another labeled Frederick W. Personal Records. Something about the placement felt deliberate, as if someone tried to hide it without outright destroying it. I pulled it free, breath-catching, when I saw the heading. Temporary Estate Reallocation. Executor file inside were signatures, notarized stamps, transfer summaries. At first glance, it all looked legitimate. But then I turned to the authorization page and everything changed. There, it was my grandfather's signature. Except it wasn't. I'd seen Frederick Whitmore sign checks, birthday cards, letters. He had a flourish to his name, a confident sweep that always ended with a deliberate dot under the E. This signature had the shape, but not the soul. It was calculated, traced, forged. "Layla," I whispered. My voice trembled. "Look at this." She stepped beside me, scanned it, and her brow furrowed. "This isn't right." The dates don't match his hospitalization timeline. And this authorization gives Walter full access to liquid assets without board review. Nathaniel took the file, flipping pages rapidly. This was never submitted through legal. They bypassed everything using this as cover, which means the asset transfers that funded Whitmore Media's expansion were fraudulent, Layla finished. I sank onto the cold tile floor, the file still in my lap. This was more than a smoking gun. It was a flame aimed at everything they'd built. My silence had cost me years of dignity. Their secrecy might cost them everything. "What happens if we reveal this?" I asked. "They could be removed from leadership, possibly prosecuted if the statute allows," Layla said. "At the very least, their credibility is gone." I stared down at the signature again. My grandfather would have never authorized this. Not without a full conversation with me. He'd once told me, "You see details others miss. That'll protect you one day." Maybe that day was now. I glanced at Nathaniel. "Do we use it?" He didn't hesitate. "It's not revenge if it's the truth. I stood dusted off my knees and slid the file into my leather folder with trembling hands. They wanted to erase me, I said, locking eyes with both of them. Let's see if they survive being seen. As we left the archive room, a strange calm settled in my chest. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting. I was holding the narrative. My phone buzzed as the elevator doors opened. Media inquiry, urgent. You've been named. They called for a family meeting. I brought a lawyer. I knew before I even stepped through the door that this wasn't a gathering meant for peace. The message had been cold and concise, dictated through Helen's assistant, like I was an employee summoned for a performance review. Sunday, 4 p.m. Family only. No warmth, no request. Just an expectation. But this time, I didn't arrive carrying guilt or baked goods. I arrived with a folder of evidence, Nathaniel Reed on video call, and Darius beside me, not behind. The living room had been rearranged into something that looked like a negotiation table at a hostile merger. The long cherrywood surface gleamed under the chandelier. Fresh water pitchers sat untouched. At the head, Walter, stone-faced. Helen next to him, legs, crossed pearls, perfectly centered. Izzy took the seat to Walter's right like a queen in waiting. I recognized the setup. It was the same one they used to scold me when I decided to attend a state college, instead of following their Ivy expectations. The only difference now was the fire in my chest and the man sitting at my side. I thought this was a family meeting, Walter said without looking at me. Not a deposition. That depends, I replied, placing the folder gently on the table on whether you plan to lie to me again. Izzy let out a theatrical sigh. This is because of that article, isn't it? You're mad the press quoted me instead of you. Typical. You weren't quoted, I said, opening the folder slowly. You planted it, and you slandered my husband in the process. Nathaniel's voice came through the laptop, clearly crisp and cool. Good afternoon. I represent Mrs. Whitmore Elena, and I'm present today to advise her on the legal implications of the materials we're prepared to disclose. Helen leaned forward, her expression more annoyed than alarmed. You brought a lawyer into this house. I brought the truth, I said. I slid the first document across the table. This is the original licensing agreement between Whitmore Media and Covatech, Darius's company, signed and countersigned. Clause 3.4, exclusive use by Whitmore Media only. Not to be sublicensed, not to be duplicated, not to be shared. Walter's brow twitched. Just slightly. I pulled out the next sheet. These are logs pulled legally, showing that your tech division shared the code with at least 2 third-party contractors, without notifying or compensating the licensor. That's a violation. Izzy laughed, but it cracked. Are you seriously accusing Dad of... What corporate theft? I didn't smile. I'm not accusing. I'm stating. And I have time-stamped proof. Helen's voice turned cold. Even if this is true, you're willing to burn the family name over a piece of software. I met her gaze. No, I'm burning the lie that says the family name is worth more than the people you trampled to protect it. Darius placed a hand on my arm. I could feel his tension. Not fear, restraint. He had remained silent for years, not out of weakness, but because I had begged him to. Not anymore. Izzy leaned across the table. You're just bitter because no one ever picked you. Not colleges, not boys, not mom, not dad. And now, you want to drag us down because you married someone with a fragile ego and a failed company. Nathaniel spoke again, sharper this time. Ms. Whitmore, I'll remind you this conversation is being documented. Continued defamation could be used in court. Walter finally slammed his palm against the table. Enough. What do you want, Elena? I didn't flinch. I rose from my chair, slowly letting the quiet settle around me. Then I said it, not loud, but with all the force I'd buried for years. Respect. And what you took from me. Walter looked stunned. Helen turned her face slightly away. But it was Izzy's reaction that truly caught my breath. Her eyes darted to Helen like a child expecting to be rescued. But Helen didn't move. In fact, she stood. Her heels tapped softly against the hardwood floor as she crossed the room. She paused at the door. No words, no excuses, no protection. And then she walked out. Izzy's mouth fell open. Mom? Silence. I remained standing, my hand on the folder I had yet to fully open. Let them think I'd played my best hand. Let them believe they'd seen the worst of what I held. They were wrong. Helen walks out of the room, not protecting Izzy for the first time. They erased my name from the family records, so I wrote it in headlines. The lights in the studio were relentless, bright, sharp, almost surgical. They cut through the layers I'd built over the years, exposing the bones of a woman who'd been forced into silence far too long. I adjusted the collar of my navy blazer, feeling the weight of every stitch. This wasn't just clothing. It was armor. Kara sat across from me, her posture poised, but I could see the shift in her eyes. The last time she interviewed someone from my family, it was Izzy in a gleaming white suit, speaking about legacy and excellence. But this time, the story wasn't polished. It was raw, and it was mine. "We're live in 5, the director said. My gaze flicked to the side, catching Nathaniel's reflection in the glass. He stood just off camera, his presence silent but solid. Layla offered a subtle thumbs up from behind the production monitors. I nodded once, not for them, but for myself. In 3, 2, the red light came on. Kara began smoothly. Joining us today is Elena Whitmore, engineer, entrepreneur, and now a name that's shaking headlines. Elena, let's start with the question on everyone's mind. Are you accusing your family of financial fraud? I didn't hesitate. No, I replied. The documents do. I'm just reading them aloud. She blinked and the control room buzzed with energy. Can you explain what you found? I unfolded the first sheet of paper in front of me, letting the camera zoom in. This document reallocates assets from the Frederick Whitmore estate into private accounts. The signature, forged. Verified by independent analysis. My grandfather was in hospice the week this was signed. I placed the second page beside it. These are transfer records, offshore accounts, shell companies. The trail leads directly to Whitmore Media's founding capital that wasn't solely theirs to begin with. And your name? Kara asked gently. Was removed, I said, silently, without legal justification. On screen, the producers highlighted the exact clauses. One showed my name under primary beneficiaries. Another showed a revised version, my name gone. I let that sit in silence. Let the country see what theft looked like in tailored suits. Across town, I imagined Helen's wine glass tipping slightly in her hand, her face frozen in disbelief, and Izzy likely speed dialing a crisis manager while still applying lip gloss. They were always ready for optics, just never for substance. This is a serious accusation, Kara said. And it's not just about money, is it? I met her eyes. It's about erasure, about how the quiet ones are the easiest to steal from, until they speak. Nathaniel's phone buzzed. I saw him glance at it, then nod once to Layla. Kara leaned in. How did you get these documents? They weren't hidden, I said. They were just never expected to be read by someone like me. Kara's face shifted respect, maybe even admiration. And what do you hope happens now? I exhaled. That the truth ripples loud enough to reach even the most insulated rooms. That the story they told about me starts to collapse. As we wrapped, Kara touched her earpiece. Breaking news sources confirm the SEC has opened a preliminary investigation into Whitmore Media's estate funding and intellectual property. In the silence that followed, I smiled not out of vindication, but recognition. This was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming what should have never been stolen. Some inherit power. Some reclaim it. Nathaniel SEC just called. They're opening an investigation. They erased my name from the family records, so I wrote it in headlines. The studio was colder than I expected, the kind of sterile chill that made people sit straighter, speak cleaner, lie better. But I wasn't here to lie. The makeup team had tried to cover the faint circles under my eyes. I let them. War paint came in many forms. The monitor across from me showed a countdown 4 minutes to live broadcast. Kara adjusted her mic, her eyes flicking between the camera and my notes. Nathaniel stood just offset, arms folded, not looking at me, but at the stage lights calculating. Layla was on her laptop monitoring the SEC's open feeds. Everyone here knew what we were about to do would ripple far beyond this hour-long segment. I studied the stack of documents in my lap one last time. They were crisp now, scanned and enlarged. Originals were in a vault, verified by 3 third-party legal teams. They weren't just proof. They were legacy corrected. The host gave us a signal. 3, 2. The red light blinked on. Kara's voice was clear-polished. Today's guest needs no dramatic introduction. Elena Whitmore has recently made headlines accusing her own family of misconduct, fraud, and forgery. But according to her, this isn't a personal vendetta. It's a revelation. Elena, welcome. I looked directly into the camera. Thank you for having me. Let's start with the question. Everyone's asking, are you accusing your family of financial crimes? I shook my head slightly. No, I'm not accusing anyone. The documents do. I'm simply reading aloud what they reveal. Kara paused, professional, but clearly intrigued. What exactly have you uncovered? I placed the first document on the desk between us, letting the camera zoom in. This is a transaction dated July 18th, 12 years ago. It reallocates estate funding from my grandfather's trust, Frederick Whitmore, into a shell corporation that then transferred those funds to Whitmore Media's startup account. And the issue, Kara prompted. I slid forward a second page. This, Frederick's signature, dated 2 weeks after he was admitted to hospice, no longer lucid. Forensic analysis confirms it's forged. There was a brief silence, and I let it linger. The camera panned in on the inked line, just shaky enough to reveal the truth. Kara's voice lowered. You were removed from the original beneficiary list. I nodded. I was included in the original documents, then quietly edited out in a revised version, without my knowledge and without legal cause. What they took wasn't just money. It was my name. A split screen showed the clause, my name first bold and clear. Then the next version, absent, erased. Back in the control room, I could hear faint typing producers, already flagging clips for headlines. They told you nothing, Kara asked. They told me to trust the family, I replied. And I did. Until I realized trust in their world was just another word for silence. As she nodded, Kara's expression shifted somewhere between shock and admiration. I knew that look. It was the same one I had worn for years, watching Izzy receive applause for the speeches I wrote for the awards I earned. Now, they'd all see whose name should have been remembered. Kara leaned forward. What do you hope this brings accountability? I said. Not just from my family, but from every system that let them do this unchecked. My story isn't rare. It's just loud now. Behind the glass, Nathaniel's phone buzzed. He read the message, then looked up with a nod. I knew what it meant. Kara continued, do you believe this could have legal consequences? I didn't blink. It already does. The screen shifted again. Nathaniel had forwarded the press release. The SEC had opened a preliminary investigation into Whitmore Media's estate funding and intellectual property. The banner crawled across the bottom of the screen in red. Somewhere in the elegant living room of her coastal mansion, I imagined Helen watching wine glass, still eyes narrowed, and Izzy fingers frantic on a phone, her PR team spinning. They always said I wasn't one of them, I said softly. Maybe that was true, but I built something. I made something out of the space they left me in. Kara cleared her throat. Final question. If you had the chance to say one thing to your family now, what would it be? I straightened my spine. Some inherit power. Some reclaim it. The red light dimmed. The segment was over. Nathaniel stepped beside me, his voice low. It's begun. A text appeared on my screen. From a private number. Just one line, SEC just called. They're opening an investigation. I didn't smile. I breathed. For the first time in years, the air tasted like mine. They gave me silence as a child. I built my peace from it. The soft clinking of cutlery laughter wrapped in comfort and the warmth of string lights hanging above our backyard created a scene I never imagined calling mine. It wasn't grand, just a long wooden table Darius and I had sanded and stained ourselves mismatched chairs and the scent of roasted rosemary drifting from the oven. But here, I wasn't just seen, I was safe. Around me were people who had stitched parts of me back together. Joanna Blake brought her signature peach cobbler humming as she poured lemonade. Nathaniel arrived late, but with 2 bottles of wine, both wrapped in tissue and labeled, "In case tonight is a beginning." Kara came quietly holding a notebook, but left it closed on the table, a sign of trust, not agenda. I raised my glass. To the ones who stayed when silence was louder than support. To Elena, Joanna said, "Voice firm." For proving silence doesn't mean surrender. We drank not in celebration of revenge, but of reclamation. Kara leaned forward after a pause. If you could say one thing to your family now, what would it be? The question lingered not sharp, but deep. It didn't wound. It opened. I set my glass down. My voice didn't shake. I hope you're watching. Not to suffer, but to learn. They'd built a fortress from shame, but I had found peace in every forgotten stone. In every dismissal, I'd collected strength. In every silence, I'd found my voice. I stood stepping to the small cabinet near the porch. Inside it, wrapped in cloth, was a bottle I had taken back from my parents' cellar during the estate inventory, an old Bordeaux Hélène had hidden when I got engaged. "Not for our kind," she had once said when I asked about it. Back then, I believed her. Now, I poured it freely. Darius reached for his glass, but instead his hand found mine. He squeezed gently. "You reclaimed more than your name, Elena. You rebuilt a legacy." My gaze swept across the table to Nathaniel, to Kara, to Joanna. These were not guests. They were witnesses. They were anchors. "We are not trash," I said, voiceful. "We're the foundation they tried to bury." Silence followed, not heavy like before, but reverent. There was no applause, no grand reaction. Just the rustle of night wind through the tall hedges and the shared understanding that I no longer needed permission to exist. Joanna leaned forward and reached into her handbag. "You may want to see this," she said, sliding a cream envelope across the table. I stared at it. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Elegant. Controlled. Helen Whitmore. I didn't touch it yet. Let it sit there a while longer, like the ghost of a chapter I was still deciding whether to read. They whispered, I was nothing. Now, my name's on the building. The silver letters shimmered under the morning sun, tall, unmistakable, permanent Elena Whitmore Innovation Center. They'd tried to forget me, to silence me, to scrub me out of the family line like a misstep. But here it was. My name, etched into steel, shining brighter than any lie they told. People gathered in the courtyard. Rows of chairs lined the polished stone path, and beside the new sign stood the podium waiting. Darius's hand was warm in mine. "It's time," he said gently. I nodded and walked to the microphone. "This isn't revenge," I began. "This is vision." My voice echoed across the open space, calm but sure. I didn't need anger anymore. I had something stronger: clarity. This center is not about erasing the past. It's about building what wasn't allowed to exist before. For every girl told she wasn't the right kind of smart. For every woman made to shrink so others could stand taller. This is for you. A pause. My breath caught as I glanced at the mural beside the steps. A painting of my grandfather, Frederick Whitmore. His eyes kind, his shoulders square beneath a brown suit. He had once told me, "Your mind is louder than their words." One day, they'll hear it. They heard it now. I stepped down. Nathaniel clapped slowly, pride in his eyes. Kara wiped the corner of her eye discreetly, though the cameraman caught it anyway. Darius met me halfway and held up the envelope Joanna had handed me the night before. I knew what it was. I had already read it. Helen's handwriting had been as elegant as ever. Inside her words, I don't expect forgiveness, but you made me see what I refused to. Just that. No signature. I folded the letter again, slid it into the pocket of my coat, and gave no one the satisfaction of a tear. I didn't need closure from her. I had already closed the door. "You did it!" Darius said, his eyes shining. I turned to face the crowd, the students, the partners, the press. "No," I said. "I became it." The program began behind us. Kara prepared to interview the next speaker. Nathaniel spoke with school administrators. But I just stood at the edge of the steps watching the faces of young girls walking toward the building, their eyes wide, their futures unburdened. One girl, maybe 16, approached timidly. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she clutched a notebook like armor. "Ms. Whitmore," she asked softly, "I read your story. Can I be like you?" I smiled. "You already are." And with that, I stepped aside, not down, letting the next voice rise. "If you've walked this far with me, thank you. Not just for listening, but for seeing me, for hearing the quiet parts of my life that were once too small for anyone to notice. Now I ask you, speak up not just for me, but for the people in your own life who've been silenced. Leave me a comment. What would you have done? What part of my story struck a chord in your own? I read every word. Because after years of being erased, I know how powerful it is to be acknowledged. And if I can offer you one truth, it's this. You don't need a stage or a family's approval or a name etched in steel to matter. You just need to keep standing, keep becoming, keep showing up for the version of yourself they said was too quiet, too different, too much, or not enough. Because one day you'll realize you never needed permission. You needed persistence. Tell me, what are you reclaiming in your life? Let's build something together. Your voice matters here. And maybe, just maybe someone out there needs to hear your story next.